Free school meals are so important for children and families. Cannot believe that in 2020 we've got humans voting that children don't get fed. It's disgusting.
So this is a message for the MPs who voted against the free school meals for the kids. I'll keep it short and simple. You bang out of order.
Absolute disgrace that this Tory government haven't stepped up to make sure that kids aren't going hungry.
In 2020 in the UK, no child should live in poverty and no child should go hungry. Our MPs have the power to change this, and so they should.
So I had to tell the doctor that I'd been eating porridge for most of my meals in order that the food, drink, etc. that we were getting in was going to the kids. I had to tell the GP how every morning when my children had their breakfast before going to school and college, that I were hoping that they might leave a little bit. They might not be able to manage all of it, so there'd be some for me.
Since the age of 8, when my mother became a one parent with 3 of us, I had first of all subsidised meals and then a couple of years later free meals. I depended on that. I mean, I'm 73 now and I don't think I would have survived without that help, and I think my sister likewise.
In Yorkshire and Humberside, almost 20% of secondary school children are eligible for free school meals. That's 20% of children who are not getting school meals over half term.
I'm an English teacher in York. I believe in free school meals because it allows every child to unlock their potential.
For many families, for many children, the free school meal is the only substantial, possibly only hot meal they get. Reinstate it.
As a mother of 2 small children, I am absolutely appalled with the decision to end free school meals this half term. Children will directly suffer as a result of this decision.
In York, we've got 3,000 children that are at risk of going hungry this half term and at Christmas as a direct result of the Conservatives' callous vote. What we need to do is help our communities, and I'm really glad that communities are stepping up where they can to help our families. But it shouldn't be like this.
It's all good and well. Local takeaways, restaurants, local supermarkets, working to try and bridge that gap. But the responsibility is not theirs. This is the responsibility of the state, and the state has failed.
Good evening and welcome to this evening's People's Assembly. They have failed our children. Join the fight back. Thank you very much, York and District People's Assembly, for that video. It has been quite a week, hasn't it? A government just completely committed to absolute selfishness and brutality of our young people, denying 1.4 million children and rising a free school meal this half term. Meanwhile, they have their food subsidised in the House of Commons. Of course, things have shifted. It has mobilised our communities. Marcus Rashford has led a brilliant campaign, but the decision to deny our young people of free school meals is a political choice, and it is the responsibility of government. We should not let them off the hook for that. Tonight, we have got a fantastic panel. We are being joined by Louise Regan, a primary teacher, Jean Morris, a pub landlord who has barred 2 of her local Tory MPs from her pub, and Melissa, a McDonald's worker and Bakers Union activist, along with Lindsay German from the People's Assembly. Unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn cannot be with us this evening. I spoke to him earlier today. I am sure we have all seen what has happened in the news, and he is very exhausted. However, from the People's Assembly to Jeremy Corbyn, we stand very much in solidarity with you. Jeremy, founded the People's Assembly. He was a founding signatory and has been committed to our cause well before we existed. So Jeremy has forever our solidarity. We will be mobilising around the attacks on Jeremy and on the wider progressive movement. So please, please stay in touch with the People's Assembly, keep in contact with our social media and look out for updates because we will be mobilising. But back to this evening. Our first person to share their activism, how they have fought back in defence of our children and our young people, is Jean Morris. So welcome, Jean. Jean, what do you do, and where are you from?
I'm from Fishguard in West Wales, very small town in West Wales, and I own and I'm the licensee of the Globe Pub.
Oh, fantastic, Jean. Jean, when you saw that the government failed to vote in support of providing free school meals for this half term, what did you do? How did it make you feel?
Well, I was appalled, as you can imagine. Obviously, living in Wales, this isn't an issue that actually affects children in this area. However, our local MPs, well, all MPs, were able to vote on this, even though it's kind of a devolved issue, really, because it's just an English issue. And, you know, because we're in a time of crisis, you know, we're in a pandemic, nobody's ever lived through anything like this before. I think one of the main priorities has got to be feeding people. I mean, that's the ultimate basic need. And, you know, when I found that my local MP, Stephen Crabb, had abstained from the vote, which he has since said was in protest at his government, and Simon Crabb, the neighbouring MP, had voted against the amendment, I just thought people need to be aware, because a lot of the time people aren't aware of how their MPs vote. So I thought, you know, if this applied to Wales, this is how they would be treating their own constituents. And I thought people need to know. So there was a pub in Yorkshire called The Mill, and they barred Rishi Sunak, who's their local MP, and the Chancellor, of course. So I thought, oh, I'll do the same, just to get the publicity. They've never been in here. I'm sure they would never want to come here. It's probably not their kind of place. I'm sure it's nowhere near posh enough for Mr. Crabb and Mr. Hart. But I just wanted to raise awareness, and I think that's happened to a far greater extent than I ever imagined.
Oh, fantastic. And Jean, what, just tell me, you know, you did this to raise awareness to how your MPs voted to your local area. How's the response been from your community?
Mostly supportive, very, very supportive. When I put it on Facebook, I just thought, because of course we're closed at the moment, you know, all pubs in Wales are closed. I imagined a few hundred of our followers would see it and sort of think, oh, good, yeah, well, you know, I didn't know that, or whatever, and just think, oh, here she goes banging on about politics again, and that would be the end of it. But then, you know, within a couple of hours, the local paper got in touch, and within a few more hours, it was on Wales Online, and then it was on the Mail Online and Metro, and it's gone viral, basically.
Oh, fantastic, Jean. And just tell me about the area that you're in South Wales. I mean, I'm a teacher up in the northeast, and child poverty is something I've seen rocket over the past decade. We're seeing a lot more child hunger, a lot more you know, poverty in terms of clothing and housing, and just in general insecurity. Is that something that you're experiencing in South Wales as well, or?
I think it's almost invisible here because we live in one of the most beautiful parts of the country here in Pembrokeshire. So people see it as a very nice area and there's beautiful houses and things. But in actual fact, we are the poorest area in Northern Europe. Child poverty and wages, etc., are the worst in the whole of Northern Europe. It's a very, very deprived area.
I mean, that's it, isn't it? We'll be hearing from Melissa later about wages, you know, organisations like McDonald's providing free school meals, but meanwhile paying their staff poverty pay. I mean, is your community is a community very much in receipt of free school meals? It's something that would be relied upon by families in your area?
yes, there's a great percentage of families relying on free school meals, including Stephen Crabb himself. When he was a child, he was brought up, he proudly tells people that he was brought up in a single parent household and he lived in a council house and the family relied on benefits, which is shocking that he doesn't sort of emphasize with families who are in a similar position now, and in fact probably a worse position, because in-work poverty here is phenomenally poor, and this crisis has just made people poorer with furlough and reduced wages, etc.
Oh, thank you very much, Jean. We've just got a few comments here. A lot of people are saying, well said, Jean. Good on you, Jean. Again, Crab was brought up on benefits himself and votes for austerity every time. And again, just echoing what you said about West Wales being one of the most deprived areas in Europe. Jean, I understand you've inspired other publicans to do the same. Is that right?
Well, one anyway.
Right.
There's a lovely little pub called the Fishguard Arms, which is just 2 doors up, and similar sort of pub, very small. And I think the day after we did it, Ian posted that he stood in solidarity basically with the Globe, and they wouldn't be welcoming any Tory MPs in there either. So Main Street in Fishguard is a Tory MP free zone now, as far as all the pubs, or should I say both pubs, go.
Excellent. That is exactly what we like to hear. Boycott the Tories everywhere is what one comment is saying. Thank you very much for your contribution this evening, Jean, and keep on fighting and don't let them in your pub, because the way they've treated our children is with absolute contempt. It is just completely and utterly horrific that they can deny free school meals to children, particularly in this time of COVID-19. Our next speaker is a McDonald's worker from South London and Bakers Union activist. As I mentioned, McDonald's are providing 1 million free school meals apparently throughout this half term, whilst knowing that they pay their members of staff poverty pay. It will be their members of staff's children who are on free school meals. So we are really pleased to have Melissa Evans with us this evening. Welcome, Melissa.
Hey, my name is Melissa. I'm a fast food worker in London and I'm part of the Bakers Union. I'm a member of the Bakers Union, sorry. Thank you for asking me to speak on this call tonight on behalf of my Max Strike siblings. The Max Strike is a movement for fast food workers in the UK fighting for £15 an hour and union recognition, for dignity and respect at work and for our families and our loved ones. We work for global fast food corporations, making billions by paying us poverty wages, forcing us to work in unsafe conditions and denying us our union. That's why in 2017, workers in the UK took part in a global strike, the first ever strike for McDonald's workers in the UK, and they won a pay rise. That's why in November last year, I took the decision to put down my tools and go on strike. I live on my own in London and I pay the highest band of rent in a housing association, sorry. But because of the trap of low pay and universal credits, it makes it impossible for me to make more money, no matter how hard I work. I feel stuck, and because of this, if I try to save, it means stretching electricity and carefully selecting which meals I can do without. I'm also a mother of a 13-year-old boy. Watching him grow into a man is a true pleasure, but always in the back of my mind, there's a reminder that the cost is only going to rise from here, and I want to fulfill his needs. I want him to go to uni, I want him to drive, and I want him to travel. I want him to live his dreams. I grew up on a West London estate. My dad was always working, trying to sustain my family, but it was all too common for us to go without food, gas, or electric. I remember when the lights would go out near the end of the month, and my parents would make it a special occasion to light the candles and to take time away from the TV. Now that I've grown older and I've reflected on this memory, I'm both shocked and in awe that they were able to stay so strong. There's 6 of us. They had 6 children. Poverty is inherited, and I want to break the wheel. I want to show my son that there is more to life than poverty. My story is the story of millions of working class people across the country, underpaid and undervalued, working 1 or 2 jobs that barely put food on the table. This is why, as a fast food worker, I've decided to come together with my workmates to fight for £15 an hour, end 0-hour contracts and youth rates, and get union recognition. McDonald's workers like me have been left on the sidelines. Before the pandemic, we used to deal with abusive bosses, unsafe work environments, and a total lack of a voice to raise our concerns. For most, it can be expected that once you've clocked off shift, what happens at work will be left at the door, but the stress we experience every day follows us home. Like my parents, I go without food, electricity, and gas. And on top of that, I regularly dream of the beeping and the fast pace of working in McDonald's. It's bad enough that we sell our waking life for minimum wage, but now they get to get our dreams for free. Under the context of COVID, these problems have only increased. The limited access to PPE, overcrowded kitchens that make it impossible to socially distance, abusive customers shouting at us for being asked to wear a mask. And to add insult to injury, if we get sick and have to self-isolate, we are only entitled to statutory sick pay. Workers have been marginalised and left to bear the brunt of this virus, but McDonald's have received hundreds of millions from the government in tax-funded wage subsidies. Our taxes are being used to keep fat cats at the top of corporate structures in business, while simultaneously we only received 80% from the furlough scheme during lockdown. As always, in times of crisis, it's working people that have to bail out the big businesses whilst left in destitution. Last month, it paid $930.1 million in dividends to shareholders, despite McDonald's in the UK furloughing over 100,000 staff members at the public's expense through the UK government's job retention scheme. Recently, McDonald's have both publicly announced its commitment to providing 1 million meals for underprivileged families and its support for Black Lives Matter movement. Yet its employees, like me, are all too often relying on food banks or our 1 free meal a day at work because we simply cannot afford the cost of eating. It's actually quite cheeky considering they pay their workers poverty wages. Fast food employers rely heavily on BAME workers to sustain the businesses, and yet it fails to address the structural and endemic racism we face on a daily basis. Over the last year, COVID has provided us with a defining moment where it is clear who truly keeps this economy alive. They are nurses, teachers, drivers, and workers in fast food and hospitality. Before the pandemic, fast food and the service sector jobs were labelled as unskilled and undeserving of a real living wage. Now, hospitality workers are the centre stage in the debate over national and local lockdowns. In the face of this, fast food workers have been getting organised. We are coming together. We are building a platform to raise the voices of workers all over this country. Just this year, workers in our movement forced Witherspoon's boss, Tim Martin, to pay his workers during the last lockdown. We've shown solidarity to workers striking in America for Black lives and in France over sexual harassment. From here, we intend to continue to start difficult conversations about the realities of workers on minimum wage. We will continue to organise more workers and events to get our message out to those feeling left out and in desperate need for change. But most of all, we will continue to spread the movement of solidarity, because it's only when workers come together and stand shoulder to shoulder that real change is possible. For workers to receive a living wage and dignity at work is long overdue. Our fight is one that belongs to all workers, not just those in fast food and hospitality. In many ways, I feel we're carrying the flame from past generations like my parents and theirs before them. History is littered with struggles just like ours. And for the first time, the truth is out in the open. We now know who really makes the profits for these companies, and the cracks in the capitalist system have been blown wide open as a result of this pandemic. Now more than ever, it is vitally important that we as fast food workers stand and fight for £15 an hour and end to 0-hour contracts and youth rates and union recognition. For our loved ones, for our communities, and now for our lives. We do deserve a living wage, and we deserve dignity and respect. Now is our time to be heard. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melissa. That was amazing. And you are completely right. COVID is a crisis in capitalism, and we fully support your campaign and fight for £15 living wage is absolutely the minimum workers at McDonald's should be paid, and also other workers in all the other industries that have proven themselves to be vital over this pandemic, feeding the nation. So thank you very much, Melissa. There's been a few comments here. We are trying to deal with hunger. We are trying to deal with hunger. Surely hand-in-hand childcare should be tackled. My daughter would love to work but is unable to because of her children in the holidays. Zoe Miranda here says, you brought me to tears on the train. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and we are behind your cause fully. Who else have we got? There's been a fair few. We need a real workers' party as Labour, not a real workers' party. The Tories have utter contempt for the working class. I completely agree.
Completely agree.
With their contempt. So thank you very much, Melissa. I just want to highlight everybody's attention to a campaign. I am a teacher within the National Education Union. We have got a child poverty campaign also going called Leave No Child Behind. We are demanding free school meals in the holidays to end holiday hunger. We would like to see an extension of free school meals as a bare minimum to those on universal credit. School uniforms, we beyond affordability for many families. We'd like to see affordable uniforms, and also we would like to see a Wi-Fi provision and a school's technology budget to help children in poverty be able to access learning at home, which is something that has been incredibly which is an incredibly important issue at the minute in the context of the pandemic. We have children being sent home in bubbles and in forced to self-isolate for periods of time, and they cannot simply access learning at home if they are in poverty. Often it is not just a case of not having a laptop or not having Wi-Fi. You may have Wi-Fi or you may have a laptop, but their access to, there's one laptop in the house for 3 children or multiple people. There really needs to be a concerted effort to improve on this. So that brings us to our next speaker, Louise Regan, a primary teacher from Nottinghamshire. I understand Nottingham has just gone into tier 3. So welcome, Louise. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. First, can I thank Jean, because people like Jean make me feel so much better when they stand up and speak out and support our fight for our children, and it's been really hard as a teacher, so thank you for that. And Melissa, thank you. My daughter works at McDonald's, she's 23, and I hear you in everything that she says when she gets home on a daily basis. And you know, she still lives at home because she can't afford not to live at home. As Daniel says, I come from Nottingham. We are we have some of the highest rates of child poverty in the country, in our city, and it's quite shocking. So I'm just going to say a little bit about me, about child poverty, about what it's like from a teacher's point of view, and then say a bit about what I think about the government, which obviously won't be very positive, as I'm sure most of you will realise. So I've been a primary teacher for over 30 years, and I've seen firsthand the impact of poverty on children, young people and their families, and it's not a pleasant thing. A few years ago, my union, I'm in the National Education Union, Daniel's just referred to it, held a sort of debate with educators around the things that they saw in their schools around poverty. And I remember talking in that debate about things in my school, but hearing from people up and down the country. And it's quite shocking, you know, but these are all things that I know and I see. Children that are smaller because they don't get enough food, pale skin, often looking very pale, and sort of a palate about them where they haven't had enough food to eat. They get ill more often. Children that steal food out of bins because they don't have enough to eat at home. Children with inadequate clothing. There was a story of a child who wore his trousers back to front because he had holes in the knees and he was too embarrassed to wear them the right way round because people mocked him because he had holes in his trousers. Children coming to school without coats, without appropriate footwear. I've seen children with tape holding their shoes together so that they can still come to school. I know of children sharing clothes. So one child goes to school one day, another child goes the next day because there's only one pair of shoes in the house for the children to wear. inadequate housing, damp conditions. I've been in homes where there is water running down the walls and children are living in that on a daily basis. The impact on their health is, unimaginable. Parents who can't afford heating. Your story, Melissa, about candles, I've heard that story. I've heard parents say, we're having a little party, we're having candles tonight. It's not because they want to have a little party, it's because they can't afford to put any money in the electric meter. And, we should be aware that people with meters have to pay more for their power than those without meters. So if you can afford to have a direct debit, it's cheaper for your energy than if you have a meter, you're automatically charged more. So the poorest people in our communities are charged more for the things that they need as an essential item. I've seen children and parents anxious as school holidays approach, literally coming in tears because they know they're not going to be able to manage over a holiday period. Run food banks in schools and regularly provided breakfast to children that have come in on a daily basis with nothing to eat. I know I've got friends whose schools have installed washing machines to help families. And one friend told me a harrowing story of a parent who arrived on the door of school, collapsed and said that she hadn't eaten for days because she didn't have enough food, but wanted to give everything she had to her children, collapsed and was really ill because of it. We live in one of the richest countries in the world, and yet 4.2 million children live in poverty in this country. That's 30% of children in this country living in poverty. 44% of children in lone parent families live in poverty, and we all know the reasons why that is. 46% of children from Black and minority ethnic groups live in poverty. And I know we're not talking about COVID tonight, but actually when you look at these poverty figures and you look at what has happened in this COVID crisis, we can see that this is a class issue. What has happened and the treatment of our communities, it's a class issue, and we have a duty to act and fight against what is happening. And people often say it's about benefits. I often used to get this thrown at me. It's about people on benefits, and all of this. 72% of children growing up in poverty live in a household where at least one person works, often in a two-parent working household. I cannot tell you how angry I was when MPs voted to not extend the holiday free school meal scheme at half term. It cost 125 million around to provide free school meals over the 6-week holiday. Assuming a similar cost, it would have cost around £20 million to provide free school meals for this week's half term. That would have fed 2 million children. Daniel's already referred to it. We already pay £4.4 million to subsidise MPs' dinners. I find it hard to say those words. There are 650 of them. They've just voted through a significant pay rise for themselves, already on salaries close to £70,000, and yet they feel it's acceptable to have subsidised meals. I have no idea how that can be acceptable. It would cost £20 million to feed these starving children, which is 0.17% of the £12 billion which was wasted on the failed track and trace system. Daniel's referred to the National Education Union campaign. Daniel was in an excellent video that was launched today. I would really encourage people to get behind that campaign and of No Child Left Behind and support our union in fighting for our children. And I will end with this. Austerity, poverty, they're not inevitable. These are political choices. Governments have created low paid and precarious work. They've reduced child benefit and benefits and left our families to suffer. Money is clearly available when it's needed. We've seen that throughout this crisis. When the government's needed to pay fat cats money, they've been able to do that. But when we talk about investing in children and families, they don't want to do it. There's plenty of ways this government could have changed this crisis, but they've chosen not to. We have a duty to stand by our communities and to fight for what they deserve. And I'm right behind the People's Assembly. I'll be fighting with you and I'll be fighting with my union, and solidarity to all of you out there. And thank you for coming and listening.
Thank you very much, Louise. Absolutely superb. You're completely correct as well. Our young people have been forced to pay for a crisis that they had no part in creating over the past decade of austerity. It's their services that have been cut, parents' pay that's been cut, their housing cut, and it was never their crisis. They didn't bring down the banks. They didn't gamble people's money on the stock exchange, and nor are they responsible for the crisis that's unraveling now. Johnson's mishandling of COVID-19. So thank you very much. A couple of comments that have come through in the chat from Ian Drummond. I wish you were the MP for Nottingham, Louise, is one of them. Another one is from Carol Vincent. Louise, it is excellent seeing you and listening to you speak out still. I remember with such fondness the hospitality of you and your comrades when we marched from Jarrow to London on the People's March for the NHS. So thank you very much, Louise. Our next speaker, before we open it up a little bit to some questions and things, is from the People's Assembly, our very own Lindsay German. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Daniel. And thanks to everybody who's spoken. I mean, these are just such great stories, and there's so many hideous facts, but facts that we need to know about, and it's very, very important. I wanted, before I said anything about this, just to say a little word about Jeremy Corbyn, because I've been very shocked by the things that have happened today. I think it's absolutely unjust what has taken place, and I think that, you know, I've known Jeremy Corbyn for many years, and I would say he's somebody who's always been an anti-racist, who's always defended the Palestinians. His position on both of these things has never changed. And I think that one of the reasons that we're now seeing this continued attack on him is precisely because he's identified with the kind of policies, not just on those questions, but also the domestic policies that we're talking about, the question of poverty, the question of how our children are treated, the question of, you know, how much money people should have if they do need support from the state, as millions of us do at various times in our lives. And I think that really the Labour Party needs to understand, and the Labour leadership needs to understand, that actually we need to oppose what the Tories are doing, and we need to oppose it much, much more strongly than is the case at the moment. I mean, that vote last week was an absolute disgrace. And the defence from the Tory MPs about why they voted in this way was even more disgraceful, blaming the poor because, you know, they dare to have televisions, or they dare occasionally to have a pint of beer, or any of these sorts of things, strikes me as exactly the kind of horrible 19th century attitude which led us to creating a welfare state in the first place. And I just wanted to sort of pick up on the point, particularly that Louise kind of ended with, because people have talked about a lot of the statistics, and I don't want to repeat those things, but this isn't an accidental thing. We're this incredibly rich country, and yet we've got one of the highest levels of inequality in the world. We've got a situation, I'm all in favour of free school meals, and please don't misunderstand me, but free school meals are not going to deal with this on their own, because it's good, but it's a sticking plaster in terms of what kids and their parents are now facing. And the reason for it is that we have an endemically poverty-driven economy. We have an economy which is saying we want people to work on the minimum wage. People who can't afford childcare, don't worry, their mum can look after the kids for a few hours a day because that's how they hold down their jobs. We're saying to people, okay, if you work in McDonald's, or if you work in one of the minimum wage jobs, the state does top you up, actually, but what they're actually doing is they're subsidising greedy landlords who are charging huge rents to people, and they're subsidising miserable employers who won't pay a proper living wage for people. And I think this basic right, I believe that really we should have at least a £15 minimum wage. I do not know how people cope when there's two of them in work and they're both on minimum wage, how people cope with rent, how they cope with food, which the prices are going up all the time, how you cope as you're coming up to Christmas and children want all sorts of treats and want toys, and we all want to be able to give them those sorts of things. It is absolutely criminal. And this is something which goes back to the way in which the trade union movement has been attacked over the last 30 years. You know, the miners' strike was about destroying union strength and destroying decent jobs with collective bargaining and with decent wages and with all the things that should be an absolute minimum right for people. You look at what has happened to the working class since then. The wages have been driven down. In the old mining areas, you're seeing these places like Sports Direct and Amazon and all these places building big warehouses when they treat people badly, where they're in conditions which are not good in many, many places. And all of this has been a very, very conscious decision by successive governments and by the employers. And that is what we're fighting against. And I think we've got to put it in this context. We want to fight for free school meals, and I would like to see the People's Assembly not only campaigning over that. We're coming up to Christmas. We're in the winter months when it's the coldest and it's the hardest for people, and you're stuck indoors in the dark, and you know you can't go out in the evenings, and you can't take the kids out to the park or anything like that. I would like to see that we have campaigns where we begin to collect food and toys and clothes if that's necessary, things that people really need, not as an act of charity, but as a political statement as well. Hopefully they will help people, but we need to say we are going to do this. But also we've got to challenge this government. This government is a government of millionaires. It is a government which could not care less about the people, whether they elected them or not. And some of the people who elected them in December, I'm sure, are very much regretting that they've elected them, but they couldn't care less about ordinary people. And therefore we have to be the people. I hope that MPs will join us in this. I hope that Labour MPs and other MPs in opposition parties, I don't hold out much hope for any of the Tory MPs, to be perfectly frank with you, but I hope that the MPs in other opposition parties will do this. We've got to step up our campaigning over this. We cannot continue with a system which is simply insupportable, and where the price of continuing this system is children going hungry, not having clothes to go to school, and their parents absolutely desperately sick with worry because they don't know how to feed them and they don't know how to keep a roof over their heads. This is not living, it is a bare existence, and it's barely existence for some people. That has to change, and I would like to see a much bigger emphasis on really fighting against this government. I think the People's Assembly has done a great job. We have to continue to do that. We have to bring in wider and wider forces to make sure that it happens. So solidarity to everybody here, solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn, and you know, let's use this absolutely terrible crisis that the Tories have brought us on to recognise what a big political problem we have and to begin to organise to fight against it.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Absolutely spot on. Completely true as well about the bare existence that many people exist really. It's a paradise for some, isn't it? But a pair of dice for most people. Life very much at the moment. A couple of comments here. What's the point in the Labour Party when the leader of the opposition is a Manchester United football player? I mean, that's an interesting question to pose right now, isn't it? It's a very interesting question. More on Jean about well done, keep fighting. And here we have from Carol Vincent. Starmer is failing our children too. I can't recognise the Labour Party. Starmer is a lawyer. This is not about winning a case. It should be about political choices being made. He should be tearing this government apart, not suspending Jeremy. He should be strengthening the position by challenging the government at every turn, not pussyfooting around. Angela wasn't my choice for deputy, it was Richard, but she passionately reacted to the despicable far-right Tory Ben Bradley when she said scum. What he said was contemptible, yet what has happened to him? Maybe read the one. Oh, maybe read the book. That's a message from Ramona, I think. Okay, so let's throw it up into a bit of discussion now. I think, what can we do to fight the rising curve in child poverty? How are we going to organise? What is our strategy from here on out? Would anybody like to chip in? Louise.
Well, I mean, I just want to follow on from what Lindsay said, really, because I think it's really important that I don't think we should be seen as being charity, because I don't, you know, whilst I'm happy to support anyone, charity is about filling in what governments should be doing. So, but equally, I think we in Nottingham, we went and did a plate protest outside our Tory party headquarters in the city centre, and left empty plates for them with messages about how they'd let down our children. Nottingham has a 2-week half term as well, which I think people just need to be aware of, because our children have gone 2 weeks without free school meals. So we have a 2-week half term. So it's even more difficult. Our city council have now agreed to issue vouchers and pay for them, but we're a council that's struggling already. So, you know, it's just money being taken out of money that we haven't already got. But they have committed to do that, and I'm really pleased that they have. But when we were there, we talked about the fact that we need to do something now over the next few weeks leading up to Christmas. I'm really concerned about, children's mental health has been massively affected during this crisis anyway. It's not, I'm really pleased schools are open. I'm a teacher. I'm anxious about it in some ways, but I'm really pleased that children and young people are back in and meeting with their friends, and we need to keep fighting to make sure it's as safe as possible. But it has hit young people really hard. And if we now go into a sort of a winter of discontent in some ways, where we haven't got money, where families are anxious, I know when children are living in poverty, children pick up really quickly that their parents are anxious or worried. Children know that. They inherently know when their parents are worried about stuff, when there isn't enough food in the cupboard. And I think as a People's Assembly, certainly here in Nottingham, we have already started talking about what we're going to do collectively in terms of collecting in food, but also things like treats and gifts. If we can organise some collection of gifts so that there is something for our children and young people. And I think that we should do that. That is one thing we can do. But I think also speaking out a lot, Jean speaking out, Jean, you maybe think you've done nothing, but for me, you've done so much. People like you who maybe hadn't done stuff before, or who do things now, it makes a massive difference. It makes me know that there are people out there fighting for the children and young people that I teach on a daily basis, and I can't thank you enough. People like Melissa speaking out about the poverty wages that exist. These are really important times, and us collectivizing it all is really important.
Thanks, Louise. Jean, do you have any sort of other message for other business owners out there at the minute?
I've noticed there is a bit of a movement online now where quite a few other businesses have started banning Tory MPs, and there is a hashtag ban Tory MPs.
Yes.
I don't know how wide it is, but I think it would be really good if this movement did gain some momentum, because it just it doesn't really hit them where it hurts in terms of their personal socialising or whatever. But what it does do is send a really, really stark message. And I know a lot of businesses, especially in England, like I say in Wales, we do have a provision over the holidays for preschool meals. But in England, a lot of businesses are now providing food for children. Loads of cafes and pubs have sort of posted things. And I think if you're providing free meals for children, you should also be boycotting your Tory MPs. So I urge each and every one of you to talk to your local businesses to encourage them to do the same. And let's get a big movement going and shame them, because this is what really they need, is to be shamed.
Oh, thank you, Jean. I completely agree. They absolutely do need to be shamed. Melissa, where next? Where next? Bakers Union and the fight for a living wage.
We need to get all fast food workers on board with this campaign, and we need to go on strike, and we need to make McDonald's pay their workers a decent living wage so we can eat, so we can have gas, so we can have electricity, so we don't have to worry about the next day, the next meal, the next bill, the next rent. We need to be able to live comfortably, because in these times with COVID, it's already stressful enough for us to have to worry about the daily struggles that we've already got. They can afford it. They know they can. We know they can. Why can't they do it? They can. So we'll make them.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. And that is absolutely what we want to hear. We can make them. If we collectivize, if we stand together, we are strong. And so you completely with you there. Lindsay, shall we come to you for a bit of a final word, a bit of a rallying call for the movement?
Well, Daniel, I think the empty plates thing is a fantastically good idea. So I think if you want to, the only drawback, I suppose, is leaving your plates outside a Tory headquarters. You might feel that's a bit of a waste of good crockery. But on the other hand, if you've got old things, or you can scrounge some off your family or neighbours or whatever, then I think it's a very good idea. And I think we should keep doing it. We shouldn't let people forget about these people. I know that sounds an obvious thing to say, but the news cycle moves on. We know that the mainstream media isn't particularly interested in pursuing these kind of arguments, so we need to take it up. But I also think, I remember during the miners' strike, probably most people here don't remember it, but we did do all these collections. Around Christmas, people got convoys. Now it's a bit different because obviously we were taking them to places, you know, to mining villages and so on, but we must be able to find a sort of equivalent that you can take food and not just the basics, as Louise said, you know, that you can take all sorts of things, that we do that we link those up with trade unions, that we have a sort of relationship with people, that we shouldn't accept the idea that, and we should really stop accepting the idea that low wages are acceptable. I mean, this latest successor from the furlough scheme, you're getting 2/3 of your pay. Now, 2/3 of your pay, if you're an MP, is kind of all right. You'll still double the average wage on 2/3 of it. If 2/3 of a minimum wage, then you're in enough poverty then, but you are really below the waterline if you're on 2/3 of that. And if you noticed, Sunak amended it last week so that it was going to be originally third. Employees paid a third. In other words, they took a third off their wages. Employers paid a third and government paid a third. They've just cut the employers bit to 5%. This tells you what they're like. It's all for the employers and not for the people who are doing the work in this society. So that's got to change. So let's begin to pull these things together, it seems to me. We've got to say, well, can we begin to organise around the people who are taking industrial action, which is happening in a lot of places. The Rolls-Royce people have just voted. The London tube drivers have voted to go on strike over the health and safety issues. There's a lot of these things going on, but also to make it absolutely shameful that people do pay minimum wage. It shouldn't be acceptable. And it was meant to be, oh, that was a safety net. Now it's the benchmark for wages in so many industries, and that's shocking. So really, I would say join the People's Assembly. Let's get organised. Let's defend Jeremy Corbyn, but let's defend the ideas of the left that Jeremy Corbyn represents. To me, is the most important thing. It isn't just about one person. It's about saying there is an alternative. There is an alternative way of doing things, and we've got to try and find ways to getting that across to more and more people. And I think as people are hit by the COVID crisis, as they're hit by poverty, more and more people, they feel quite desperate and alone sometimes, and that's not surprising. But we need to say we can organise collectively and we can change things. And that's the most important message I think we need to get out with this.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Absolutely spot on. This isn't just about a fight over free school meals. It's about a fight to end poverty pay and a fight for decent housing and to live in dignity. We don't just want the bread of life, we want the roses as well. And as has been said, we've got 4.2 million children living in poverty in 2019. It was expected to rise to 5 million prior to this pandemic, and we are expecting to see it rocket further, well beyond 5 million. And it should not ever be this way. Our children did not cause this crisis. They have not mishandled this crisis, and they should not be forced to suffer for this crisis. So, let's all rally to arms and let's turn over this government, because, to be honest, I can't believe they're still in power. We have hundreds dying a day from COVID-19. We've got children dying in the Mediterranean because of the policies of this government, and we've got children being denied food over half term because of the policies of this government. I don't care how big their majority is. We can organise to defeat them. It is completely within our power. And absolutely correct. We need to rally behind Jeremy Corbyn, not just because of the individual Jeremy Corbyn, but the ideas that he stands for: anti-racism, anti-war, and a life to be had in dignity for everyone. So thank you very much for tuning in tonight. Please stay in contact with the People's Assembly page, because we will not be letting the attacks on Jeremy go unanswered. We will be organising not just to defend him, but to defend the ideas that we all stand for. So thank you very much, and we shall see you soon.